So this is going to be a Stephen King video. There are tons of Stephen King videos on BookTube, but I thought, because I've read so many of his books and I'm a big fan, I wanted to do one. So I'm not going to do, I don't think I'm going to review his books individually. I've chosen 10 books I'm going to look at now. There are some of his most famous ones that I haven't read yet. So I haven't read It, and I haven't read Carrie, and I haven't read Salem's Lot, and I haven't read Under the Dome, but I have read a good sort of 20 odd books by him. So I'm picking 10 that some of them are my favourite books by him, and some of them are just things that I think are worth talking about in the video where I'm going to pick 10. So they kind of range from some of his early stuff to things he's released recently. And if you're new to Stephen King, then you might find some interesting stuff here. And if you are an expert on Stephen King, or you've read some of these books, I'd love to know your thoughts on these books and whether or not you agree with what I've said about any of it.
You know, some places are like people. Some shine and some don't.
So before I get onto the actual specific books, I just want to just do a general point about Stephen King. So I think what people always say about him that I think is worth just being a general point about all of his books, all of his writing, is the characterization. That's his strength, really. He does write big books sometimes, and it's because he really goes into a lot of detail about the characters, and you know them backwards, and you feel like you know everything about their situation and their life story, if you like, and it really adds to the books. So his characterization is phenomenal. His storytelling is great on the back of that, but the first person narrative stuff works really well, and just the idea of the internal voice of the characters, whether or not it's first or third person, just works so well with how he writes. So, you know, it's not just the way he paints his characters, just the way he paints the situation and the way that the narrative works is so brilliantly done with all of his books. So even his worst books, I imagine, I mean, I don't think I've read anything I didn't like, but if there are books out there, apparently Insomnia is quite slow. When I read that, I still imagine it will be very vivid and will have lots of good qualities to it. He's just one of those writers. But the ones I've chosen, I do really like. So I'll see what you think about the books I've chosen. But certainly, as a general rule, he's just absolutely phenomenal at creating characters, making everything come to life in a very real, vivid way, and making those stories so compelling, even though sometimes they're quite big books. Okay, so The Shining. The Shining is Stephen King's third novel, published under his name, and it's made really famous since obviously having a lot of success as a novel, but it's made even more famous from the film. But the film is so different, and this is so much better, the actual novel. I do love the film, to be fair, but I absolutely love the book. So Jack Torrance is a man who loses his job, gets another job, becoming the caretaker for the Overlook Hotel. And he takes his wife and his son, his 5-year-old son, Danny, to basically look after this hotel that's been shut down for the winter. And it's not a hotel like any other. It's haunted, and he's got his own demons that he's dealing with, and it kind of gets mixed up with that. Plus, mixed in with that, you've got his son Danny, who has the Shining of the title. The Shining is this kind of like extra psychic ability that makes him just sort of ultra aware of psychic activity. So that's sort of mixed in with the plot as well. But there are several reasons why this is amazing. I mean, this is definitely one of my 3 favourite Stephen King novels, I'd say, but arguably it's probably my favourite one. But it's definitely in my top 3. So a lot of the drama is built around the relationships between Jack, Danny, and Wendy, his wife. So that is done so brilliantly. Wendy is much more sympathetic in this book than she is in the film. I'm not really sure why they took that choice to make her like she is in the film, because she's a much more rounded character, much more realistic character in the book, and you are really rooting for her. The way that Jack kind of deals or doesn't deal with his demons, and his sort of alcoholism and his sort of pent up rage, is part of the development in the book and kind of slowly builds up. And mixed in with this, you've got this really lovely character with Danny, the son. I think he's the strongest part of the book. I really like all the bits with Danny in it, and there's an awesome bit where he discovers room 217. I think it's 217. Yeah, and there's like just loads of awesome bits. Like I won't spoil it, but there's a really cool bit at the end with the hedges of the hotel. But it's just really well done, and it's really gripping. It's like a proper page turner. It's not a small book, but it's also not enormous like some of his books. So I think it's there's no real filler. There's a strong plot running through it where he's trying to figure out what's unusual, what's kind of eating at him about the hotel, and he's looking into its past, and that's done really well. And again, it's not really over laboured. It's just brilliantly written. So yeah, The Shining is an absolute must if you want to read some Stephen King stuff, and don't think you kind of know the story if you've seen the film, because the book is very different. So, Night Shift. Night Shift is a collection of short stories, and quite an early release for Stephen King, but it's a book that means a lot to me, and it's a really big part of my childhood because it was one of the first books I read voluntarily. So obviously you read stuff at school and you start reading your own things, and this was one of the first things I read. So I used to read a lot of short stories when I was younger. I do kind of keep up with that and still read short stories, but I read a lot of short stories in my teenage years, and this was one of the chief books on that front. And it's got some awesome stories in it. It's got Children of the Corn. You can see from the cover there's a reference there to the cover, which is quite a famous one, partly because of the film. But the best story in the book, I think, is Quitters Inc., which is an absolutely fantastic story. And that one and a story called The Ledge were made into Cat's Eye, which is worth watching, because when they dramatised Quitters Inc., they had James Woods playing the main character, and he does it really well. But I had read the story before I'd seen that film, so the story was kind of in my head loads. Also featured in this story, also featured in this book, is Trucks, which became Maximum Overdrive film, which was written and directed by Stephen King. So, but I think that was just an excuse for him to put AC/DC in a film for 2 hours. But yeah, that's a very short story in here, but there's some real good ones, and it's worth getting anyway, just for Quitters Inc., to be fair. But Night Shift, a really special book for me because it was one of the things that got me into reading, and it still holds up today. This one, Later, is one of his most recent books. It's part of his true crime series, and I think it's amazing. It was well reviewed, so before I read it, I was expecting a really good book, to be fair. But it's relatively short for Stephen King, and therefore the pace is much quicker for him. So it's quite a good one to kind of get you into Stephen King, if you like, as well. But regardless of that, it's just a really, really good story. Again, like he quite often does, a lot of it's from the perspective of the boy in the story. He's very good at doing children and really characterising them well. And he does that so well in this book. The boy is the main character. Jamie is his name, and he's got a special ability where he can communicate with the dead. That is kind of a setup that affects his relationship with his mother, and then as that goes on, there's a detective that starts trying to use him to try and help her to solve a significant crime. and that becomes a real problem for him because certain things won't go away. I won't spoil it. Basically, because of the pace and because of the characterization, it's really vivid, as I've been saying before about how he writes. Because of all these things, and the fact that it's such a good setup with the detective trying to push this kid to help her all the time, and he's trying not to get involved, and he doesn't like this ability he's got. All those kind of things create a really good read, and you really want to know how it's going to finish, and it finishes really well as well. It's got a really lovely ending. Later is a really good novel that I would recommend to anybody. So this is Pet Sematary. So this is, I think, the one I've probably seen the most as being called people's favourite Stephen King book. It seems like this one and it are the two most popular books. And so when I wanted to read this a little while back, because I knew it was missing in my Stephen King reading, I was expecting a lot, and I did think it was really good, really, really good. I did love it, but I was quite surprised that I wasn't quite as creeped out and horrified as everybody else seemed to be. So I don't know if I've been desensitized or something, but I did really enjoy it. I thought it was a really interesting and gripping, exciting read, but I wasn't quite as sort of disgusted as and not as horrified as I guess I should have been. I'm not sure, but basically, Louis takes his family. He's got 2 kids and a wife, and he takes them to this new area, and it's a new place to live. They've got new neighbours who they meet really early on, straight away, and he kind of creates this. He finds this new father figure in this neighbour, and they kind of settle down quite quickly. And then fairly early on in the book, you find out about this graveyard that was created by some kids that wanted to bury their pets in this graveyard, and that's kind of how it's set up. I'm not going to spoil too much, but basically things happen to the family that, for all intents and purposes, this book explores grief and dealing with death, with children in the book exploring what it means to die. Am I going to see this person again? Where have they gone? What is heaven? Those kind of things are questioned by the kids in the book, and it's about how Louis has to deal with grief as well, the main character. So it's definitely the one book I've read by him where he explores that the most. He does explore it a lot in books, to be fair, but this seems to be his big kind of meditation on death, really, and grief. So yeah, I thought it was brilliantly written, and I can see why it's so popular. It wasn't my favourite of his books. It's not even in the top 3 that I mentioned earlier, but I'm surprised that I'm not quite as horrified as everyone else seems to be by some of the things that happen later in the book. But I thought it was a really good ending, and I did like and I love the characters, as you would do with Stephen King, and I do think the actual plot moves along brilliantly. And again, it's relatively hefty, but there's no filler in this. I think it's just done really, it's paced really well. So yeah, fantastic book, and it does deserve the hype. But for me personally, it's not one of my top 3 books by him or anything like that, but it is an absolutely brilliant book, Pet Sematary.
That's strange. All of a sudden, I don't quite feel like myself.
So this is Thinner, written as Richard Bachman. So this was when he used a pseudonym, and it is brilliant. I really enjoyed this, and it's one of those books where it's got quite a lot of Stephen King books, I think, have got a bit of a Twilight Zone element to them, where there's some kind of fantastical about the story, and then it sort of runs with that kind of concept. And with this one, it's a man who accidentally runs over this gypsy woman, and as a result of that, he's cursed, and he doesn't realise he's actually overweight at the beginning of the book, and then gradually gets thinner and thinner and thinner and he sees it as a good thing in the beginning, and then realizes that it's actually seems to be a problem. He's getting too thin, and then he's getting thinner and thinner and thinner, and he has to deal with it and figure out what he's going to do about it. Can he do anything about it, and all that kind of thing. And it kind of goes into his relationship with his wife, and it's all very well characterized, as it always is with Stephen King, but it's got quite a nice ending as well. A little bit of a almost like a twist ending, if you like, but an ending that, again, so much with Stephen King, an ending that relates to his family, and ultimately it seems to be a consistent message with Stephen King that family is everything. So anything that matters is about family. So that's definitely one of the things that is a big kind of part of the conclusion of the book. So I won't spoil anything by being too specific, but that is part of the reason why it's such a good ending, I think, because he has to react to his situation differently because of a member of his family. I'm being quite vague there, but yeah, it's a really good ending. So yeah, Thinner, definitely recommend it. Yeah, one of his really early ones, and got pretty much most of what you'd want from Stephen King. Most of the things that he's good at are in this book. So Thinner. So this is Joyland. Joyland is my most recent purchase from the Stephen King point of view, the most recent book I've bought by him. But it was written in 2013, so it's not as new as Later, which I'm also doing in this video, but it's still quite recent. And it's part of the True Crime series again, so they got these awesome covers. There's one more I haven't read yet called The Colorado Kid, which has also got a really cool cover. So because I love those other two books, I'm looking forward to reading The Colorado Kid. But anyway, this is a ghost story, but ultimately it's a romantic story. The main character is dealing with the breakup of who he considers to be the love of his life, and that's a thread kind of running through certainly the first half of the book, and he starts this job at this fun fair, Joyland, and that's where sort of the ghost story part of it is set. And this is kind of the ghost story element is interwoven with the way that Devin deals with the loss of his previous relationship, and sort of looking forward, if you like. And it just got a beautiful ending. It's got an absolutely beautiful ending, and it was one of those endings that you just thought, oh, I want to read those last few pages again, because that was just really lovely. So yeah, clearly there are horrific things that happen in Stephen King books, and some really nasty characters and nasty incidents. This book doesn't really have a lot of that, but has a lot of great characterization and has a beautiful romantic ending. So Joyland, a little softer, I'd say, for comparing to some of his books, but massively worth a read. I think it's really good. (11/22/63). A big tome. It's a big one. A time travel book. So I'm already sold on that in the first place. But I absolutely loved this book. Absolutely loved it. I could say you could shave off 150 pages or something, and it wouldn't have done it any harm. But having said that, the characterization is brilliant. There are quite a few characters in it, and it's fully developed. The plot is fantastic, and what starts off with a plot where a man gets the opportunity to go back in time and potentially prevent the assassination of JFK, that becomes another plot when he goes back there to the 60s, to 1963, and he discovers other things, and he wants to stop them regardless of trying to stop JFK. He needs to stop these other things first, and that's where a lot of the bulk of the book lies. And it's really fascinating, brilliant, dramatic, sometimes romantic, sometimes really nasty. There's one particular scene that was quite difficult to read because it was so violent. And when I mentioned with Pet Sematary how thought I was desensitized because I wasn't that horrified by some of the things in it. I was horrified by one particular scene in this. I just thought it was really graphic. For all the right reasons, though. I mean, it was the right tone for it, because it certainly made the reason why he wanted to stop that happening much more vivid and real, and you were with him and all that. But yeah, when you read the back and you sort of discover the plot, you think it's all about this JFK plot, and it's not really. It's about the other things that the man discovers before that. So yeah, it's a brilliant book and a nice little addition to the tons of books about time travel. It's a really nice take on it, and again, it has this lovely romantic thread that Stephen King does do well. So yeah, the ending of the book, I'm not going to spoil it by being specific, but the ending of the book has a really nice rounded ring to it. So yeah, 11/22/63, really good book by Stephen King. Okay, The Dead Zone. I read this one when I was younger as well. I can't wait to read this again. I think it's about time. But it really had a massive impact on me when I was a teenager. I really loved it. It's about Johnny Smith, who discovers after an accident, he wakes up from a coma and discovers that if he touches someone, he could look into their future. And this means that there are several kind of subplots that come out of that. So he ends up being asked to look into a serial killer. But significantly, a big part of the plot is that he discovers quite a sinister and dangerous, quite a really serious right-wing politician in the future from touching this guy, that you can see where it's leading, and he realizes that that's a threat to the world, and so that becomes sort of a plot for the end of the book. But in the meantime, there's other subplots that come off this ability he's got to see the future, and it's just, as with all Stephen King, it's fully realised. The characters are very, very vivid. But what's interesting about this, of course, that's been mentioned recently, is the politician in that thread that results in the big finale is pretty much a template, if you like, for Donald Trump. So it's kind of odd that he wrote something kind of predicting the rise of Donald Trump. But it has been said a few times, but ultimately that's not the main point of the book, because clearly that wasn't a thing. But yeah, it's really creepy, eerie. It's got a sort of it's got a sense of mystery to it. The different subplots work really well. I don't really think there's any sort of weak spots in it. It's definitely one of his best, I think. There's also a great film version by David Cronenberg with Christopher Walken playing Johnny Smith. But regardless of that, as always, it's the way Stephen King writes that makes it great. So, don't just be content with the film. Read the book, because he's such a great storyteller. So, The Dead Zone, really, really awesome one. I think one of his best.
Yes, you're right. It is gruesome.
Okay, Needful Things. This is one of his big ones. It's one of his big ones because he literally characterizes an entire town. So you get to know, at the beginning of the book, first person you start getting to know is this teenage boy that is the first customer of the shop Needful Things. But you end up getting to know so many people in the town. And the two main people in the book, essentially, is the sheriff, called Alan, and this girlfriend, if you like. It's kind of there's definitely a relationship there, but it's not. It's a little bit like they're not really calling each other girlfriend, boyfriend. It's a bit looser than that. But she's called Polly, and they've both got this sort of they're on the brink of having a serious relationship, I think, by the tone of the book. But they seem to be the main characters, but there's a good sort of, 12 other characters that are really important in it. And you've got to try and keep a grip on that, because some of them are a bit, I'd say, I found sometimes I got a bit confused with who was who. But it didn't take out anything from the plot, and obviously you did get enough of a reminder that you were all cool with it. But it's a fantastic story. It's a classic story of a visitor visiting a town and screwing them up. And you could suggest that it's a parody or comment on greed and materialism and that kind of thing. Possibly, it's more likely he wanted to play with the trope of a visitor coming to town and messing things up. You know, like the Circus of Dr. Lau, which was written obviously before that. Those kind of stories. Something Wicked This Way Comes is another thing that kind of reminded me of a little bit. I'm not sure which was written first, actually, of those two. So the main villain, Leyland Gaunt, who's the guy who owns Needful Things, is a fantastic villain. And once it kicks off, for the last sort of couple of hundred pages, he blatantly doesn't really care about having this kind, generous veneer at the beginning, and he becomes the villain that it's kind of building up to at the beginning. And it's just utter chaos by the end of it, which is great, and it works really well. And it's got a really nice ending as well. Some people said that there's a bit of a convenient ending, but I don't really agree with that. I think it makes sense how it ended. And, you know, as always, it ends with characters and you know, how it affects the characters. Everything he writes, it's always about how it affects the real people he has characterized and painted so vividly in his books. So yeah, Needful Things, definitely one of my favorites of his. Definitely worth a read. So if you haven't read that one, definitely get it and see how Stephen King's explored that idea of a visitor coming and screwing everybody up.
You're just another lying old dirty birdie. And I don't think I better be around you for a while.
Okay, so Misery. Misery, again, I think this is one of his best books. I think it's absolutely phenomenal how he creates two absolutely fantastic characters at loggerheads. I mean, clearly one is in a position of power. But if you don't know the plot, like he often does, he writes about a writer. So the main character is a writer called Paul, and he has a car crash, and he's rescued by Annie Wilkes, who's his #1 fan. And clearly this is an exploration of the crazy fan idea, and you know, because these people do exist. But Annie Wilkes is an absolutely phenomenal villain. She's completely mad, and the way that she treats him in the book, without too many spoilers, is horrific and horrible. And she's clearly completely disturbed. I mean, there are some things that are in the text of the book that show that it's not just about what she does to him, but just in general, there's just some mad stuff in there that clearly she's not quite there. So a fantastically realised villain with Annie Wilkes, and some really interesting explorations of fear, of being completely powerless, the desperation of Paul, the main character, is done really well in the book. And, you know, it's just one of those things that it shows off how good he is at writing, because sometimes not a lot happens, but you're still gripped by the story. And, recommend that to anybody, really. So possibly a good way to start with him, I'd say. Just a few examples I've just given earlier about that sort of thing. But Misery, cracking book, one of his best, I think. So that's 10 Stephen King books. I chose those because I think it's a nice sort of variety of new and old, and covers some of the really famous ones, plus a few others that aren't so famous. There's still a few I need to read, to be fair. I mean, he's done like 50 odd books. So there's a lot I haven't read, but there's some of the big ones I haven't read as well, as in some of the really famous ones. But it's interesting with Stephen King that he is so famous, partly because there's been so many film adaptations of his books. But I would say that if you do read, then please check out his books, because they're great stories, but what makes them really great is his writing. So there are some really good adaptations of his books, like Shawshank Redemption and Misery and a few others. But it's the writing that makes it so great. You know, he's such a good storyteller, and he just makes everything so real, and his characters are incredible. So yeah, it's just certain little things he does in his writing that makes sort of put a smile on your face, or makes everything just so vivid and makes you believe it so well, especially considering so much of it is clearly far-fetched, but he makes it so believable. So yeah, he fully deserves all the hype. He is just a phenomenal writer. I also find him quite fascinating. I've got some of his books that are just about writing, and I've seen lots of interviews with him. I think he's just a fascinating man anyway, just listening to him talk about writing and talk about his career. So yeah, a really interesting man, but definitely check out his books. So those are 10 examples of books you could check out. But I think he's such a prolific writer, but actually so many times he hits a nail on the head that you could probably pick something at random and it'll be good. So yeah, those 10 books recommended from me. So thanks for watching. If you do like these videos, please subscribe to the channel, spread the word, and I'll be doing another one soon. Thanks a lot, guys, for watching.
Paint me a picture